In a village where no woman had hair, one girl was born different. They called her cursed. They shaved her beauty in public. They locked her away to die in shame. But what they didn't know was that her hair was not a curse. It was the proof of her innocence. This is the story of Mary, the girl they tried to destroy, and the truth that could not be buried. Many years ago, in a small village deep inside the forest, something very strange happened to all the women. This village was known far and wide as the Bald Village because no woman there had a single strand of hair on her head. The story of this condition started with a woman named Nneka who lived there a long time ago. Nneka was falsely accused of hurting her husband, and the angry villagers chased her into the evil forest without listening to her side of the story. Before she ran away, she cried out in pain and placed a heavy curse on the land, saying that if she was innocent, no female born in that land would ever grow hair again to show their beauty. From that day forward, every baby girl was born completely bald and remained that way for the rest of her life. The people of the village accepted this as their normal life, and they stopped questioning why they looked different from women in other places. The women wore colorful head ties known as jeel to cover their smooth heads, and they went about their farming and trading without shame. This continued for many generations until a special day when a woman named Ada gave birth to a baby girl. The midwife screamed in shock when the baby came out because the child had a head full of thick, black hair. This baby was named Mary, and her birth brought fear to the hearts of the elders. Mary's mother was very weak after giving birth, and sadly, she closed her eyes and died before she could hold her miracle baby. Her father was so heartbroken by the loss of his wife that he fell sick and died just a few days later. Mary was left all alone in the world as an orphan with strange hair that no one else had. The villagers looked at her with suspicion because they believed her hair meant something dangerous was coming to their quiet village. Since Mary had no parents, the village chief decided she must live with her father's sister, a woman named Aunt Grace. Aunt Grace was a tall woman who always tied her wrapper very tight, but her heart was full of bitterness and jealousy. She had her own daughter named Joy, who was the same age as Mary, but Joy was bald just like every other girl in the village. Aunt Grace hated Mary because every time she looked at Mary's long hair, she felt angry that her own daughter did not have such beauty. She treated Mary not like a niece, but like a slave who was born to serve her and Joy. Mary grew up to be a very kind and gentle girl, even though she was treated very badly inside her aunt's house. While Joy slept late into the morning, Mary would wake up before the cock crowed to fetch water from the stream and sweep the compound. She wore old, torn dresses while Joy wore fresh Ankara clothes that their mother bought from the market. Despite the hard work and the insults, Mary's hair continued to grow longer and more beautiful every single day. It was so long that she had to plait it carefully and hide it under a scarf so that the other villagers would not stare at her too much. The villagers had mixed feelings about Mary because some of them admired her unique beauty, while others feared she was a witch. Aunt Grace saw this fear and used it to make people dislike Mary even more. She would tell the neighbors that Mary was lazy and rude, even though Mary was the one doing all the cooking and cleaning. Mary never complained or talked back because she simply wanted to have a family and be loved. She did not know that her aunt was planning to get rid of her because her beauty was shining too bright. One bright morning, the sound of the big wooden gong echoed through the entire village to call everyone to the market square. The king sent his town crier to deliver a very important message that would change the lives of everyone in the village. The town crier, dressed in his official animal skin vest, announced that the prince, whose name was Prince John, had returned from his studies in the city. The king wanted his son to choose a wife from the maidens of the village, so a great festival would be held in 7 days. Every young woman was expected to attend the festival wearing her best traditional attire to dance before the prince. This news caused a lot of excitement and panic among the young girls and their mothers. Everyone wanted to be the one chosen by Prince John because he was handsome and would one day be the king. Aunt Grace was determined that her daughter Joy would be the one to marry the prince, so she immediately started planning. She went to the market and bought the most expensive lace material and gold jewelry for Joy to wear on the day of the festival. She spent all her money on Joy and bought nothing for Mary, hoping that Mary would look too ugly to attend the dance. While all this was happening, the village oracle, a wise old woman who lived near the shrine, had a vision. She told the king that the ancient curse on the village could only be broken by a special woman. The oracle said that the prince must marry the girl with the mark of the innocent ancestor, and only then would hair return to all the women. The villagers whispered that this special girl must be Mary because of her hair, and this gossip made Aunt Grace very angry. She knew she had to stop Mary from going to the festival at all costs. The week before the festival was full of activity as women cooked delicious jollof rice and pounded yam in preparation for the feast. Mary worked harder than ever because Aunt Grace made her wash all the clothes and scrub the floors until her hands were sore. While Joy practiced her dance steps in the compound, Mary was in the kitchen blowing the fire to cook for them. Aunt Grace warned Mary that she was not allowed to go near the palace because her strange hair would scare the prince and bring shame to their family. However, Mary had a secret wish in her heart to see the prince, not because she wanted to be queen, but because she wanted to join the celebration. On the eve of the festival, Mary found an old piece of Ankara fabric that her mother had left behind in a box. She stayed up late at night, sewing it into a simple but lovely dress that fitted her perfect shape. She washed her hair and braided it in a style that looked like a crown on her head. On the morning of the festival, Aunt Grace saw Mary in the dress and was shocked by how beautiful she looked. She was afraid that if the prince saw Mary, he would never look at Joy or any other girl. Aunt Grace pretended to be nice and told Mary she could come to the festival later, but first, she had to finish shelling a large bag of melon seeds. Aunt Grace knew it would take hours to finish the work, which would make Mary miss the opening dance. Mary sadly sat down to work, while Aunt Grace and Joy walked proudly to the palace square. Mary worked very fast with tears in her eyes because she really wanted to hear the music and see the people dancing. She finished the work just as the sun was starting to go down, and she ran as fast as her legs could carry her to the palace. When she arrived, the drumming was loud, and the prince was sitting on his throne watching the girls dance in a circle. Mary stood at the back of the crowd, trying to hide behind a tall man so no one would see her. Suddenly, the wind blew the scarf off Mary's head, and her long, shiny hair fell down her back for everyone to see. The crowd gasped and went silent, and even the drummers stopped beating their drums for a moment. Prince John stood up from his chair and walked slowly towards the crowd to see what was happening. He saw Mary standing there with her head bowed, looking like a frightened antelope in the forest. He had never seen a woman with hair before, and he thought she was the most beautiful creature he had ever seen. The prince reached out his hand and asked Mary to dance with him in the center of the square. Aunt Grace and Joy watched with open mouths and burning anger as the prince smiled at Mary. They danced together, and the prince told Mary that he had heard stories about her and wanted to know her better. The king nodded his head in approval because he remembered the words of the oracle about the chosen one. Aunt Grace knew in that moment that she had to do something drastic and evil to destroy Mary before the prince could marry her. That night, Aunt Grace could not sleep because jealousy was burning inside her chest like a hot fire. She called Joy into her room and told her that they must get rid of Mary or else Joy would never be queen. They decided that they could not kill Mary because the king would investigate, so they planned to ruin her reputation instead. In their village, a woman had to be pure and decent to marry a prince, so they decided to frame Mary for being loose and immoral. Aunt Grace went to a bad man in the next village who was known for doing dirty jobs for money. She paid him a bag of coins and gave him clear instructions on what he needed to do the next night. She also went to the herbalist to buy a strong sleeping potion that would make someone sleep like a log of wood for many hours. She returned home with a wicked smile on her face, hiding the potion inside her wrapper. The next evening, Aunt Grace acted very kind to Mary and offered her a cup of sweet hibiscus drink. She told Mary that she was sorry for treating her badly and wanted them to celebrate her success with the prince. Mary, having a pure and trusting heart, believed her aunt and drank the whole cup without suspicion. A few minutes later, Mary felt very dizzy and fell into a deep, heavy sleep on her mat. Aunt Grace then signaled for the bad man to come into the compound and sneak into Mary's room. In the middle of the night, while the whole village was sleeping peacefully, Aunt Grace suddenly ran out of her house screaming. She shouted at the top of her voice that there was an abomination in her house and called for the neighbors to come and see. The villagers, hearing the alarm, ran out of their houses carrying lanterns and sticks, thinking there was a thief. Aunt Grace led the crowd, including the village elders, straight to Mary's room and kicked the door open. Inside the room, they found Mary sleeping on her mat, and next to her was the strange man that Aunt Grace had paid. The man pretended to be waking up and acted as if he and Mary had been together intimately. The villagers were shocked and covered their mouths in shame because it was forbidden for a maiden waiting for the prince to be with another man. Mary woke up confused and groggy from the potion, unable to understand why everyone was staring at her with disgust. The elders dragged Mary and the man to the king's palace immediately, demanding justice for the shame she brought to the village. Mary cried and begged, saying she did not know how the man got there, but no one believed her because the scene looked very real. Aunt Grace stood there wiping fake tears from her eyes, telling the king that she tried to raise Mary well, but the girl was stubborn. The prince looked at Mary with sadness and disappointment, not knowing that it was all a setup. The king was very angry because he felt Mary had disrespected the tradition and the prince. He asked the strange man if he had been with Mary, and the man lied and said yes, claiming Mary invited him in. The village custom demanded a severe punishment for a woman who claimed to be pure but was found with a man. The elders decided that Mary must be stripped of her beauty so that she would look like everyone else and learn humility. The punishment they chose was to shave off all of Mary's beautiful hair in the village square for everyone to see. The guards dragged Mary to the center of the square and forced her to kneel down on the dusty ground. The village barber brought out a sharp razor blade that glistened in the morning sun. Mary screamed and pleaded with her aunt to tell the truth, but Aunt Grace just looked away with a cold face. As the barber began to shave her head, Mary cried bitter tears that dropped onto her lap. Her long, black hair, which was the sign of the prophecy, fell to the ground in large clumps. The villagers watched in silence, some feeling pity while others felt she deserved it for deceiving the prince. When it was over, Mary was completely bald like the other women, and she felt naked and ashamed. The king ordered that she be locked in a hut at the edge of the forest until she learned her lesson. Mary was locked in a small, dark hut with only a little window to let in sunlight. She spent the first 2 days crying and praying to the spirit of her dead parents to help her prove her innocence. She felt very lonely and abandoned by the prince and the people she loved. However, on the third morning, Mary woke up feeling a very strange itching sensation all over her scalp. She reached up to scratch her head and was shocked to feel soft stubble growing very fast under her fingers. In the history of the bald village, it was known that once a woman's hair was shaved or lost, it would never grow back again. But as the hours passed, Mary's hair grew longer and longer, faster than it had ever grown before. By the evening, her hair was back to its full length, shining even brighter than it did before the punishment. Mary suddenly remembered an old saying from the oracle that she had heard when she was a child. The saying was that only the guilty remain bald, but the hair of the innocent cannot be destroyed by man. Mary realized that her hair growing back was the sign from the gods that she was innocent of the crime she was accused of. She stood up and banged on the wooden door of the hut, shouting for the guards to come and see what had happened. The guard who was standing outside heard the noise and opened the small window to tell Mary to be quiet. When he looked inside and saw Mary with a full head of long hair, he dropped his spear in fear and ran to tell the king. The news spread like wildfire through the village that the girl who was shaved yesterday had hair again today. Aunt Grace heard the news and began to tremble in her house, knowing that her secret was about to be exposed. The king, the prince, and the elders marched to the hut to see this wonder for themselves. When they unlocked the door and Mary stepped out, the villagers gasped and fell to their knees. The oracle stepped forward and declared that the gods had spoken, and Mary was innocent because the curse could not hold her. The prince looked at Mary with love and regret, realizing he should have trusted his heart. The king turned to the crowd and demanded to know the truth about what happened that night. He ordered his soldiers to find the man who was found in Mary's room. The soldiers dragged the man from his hiding place, and when he saw the king's angry face and the miracle of Mary's hair, he became terrified. He fell to the ground and confessed that Aunt Grace paid him to lie down next to Mary and that nothing happened between them. The village went silent as everyone turned their eyes toward Aunt Grace in joy. Aunt Grace tried to run away into the bush, but the women of the village caught her and held her tight. She was dragged before the king, screaming and blaming the devil for her actions. The king was furious that a mother could be so wicked to her own brother's child just because of jealousy. The king declared that since Aunt Grace and Joy wanted to ruin Mary's life, they would now serve Mary for the rest of their lives. He ordered that they would be the ones to sweep the palace and wash the plates during the wedding preparations. This was a heavy shame for them because they were used to being proud and arrogant. The villagers cheered for the king's judgment because they were tired of Aunt Grace's bad behavior. Mary stood before the king and the prince, and the king apologized to her for the pain they caused her. The prince took Mary's hand and asked her to forgive him and to be his wife. Mary, being a girl with a golden heart, looked at her aunt and cousin and said she forgave them, but they must learn to be kind. Her hair flowed in the wind as a symbol of her victory over the lies and the evil plot. The wedding day of Prince John and Mary was the biggest celebration the village had ever seen. People came from neighboring villages to see the bride with the magic hair. Mary wore a stunning white lace dress with a purple wrapper, and beads made of red coral were around her neck. Her hair was styled high on her head, decorated with gold clips and flowers. As soon as the priest joined their hands together and pronounced them husband and wife, a strong wind blew across the village. Suddenly, all the women in the crowd started scratching their heads because they felt a tingling sensation. One by one, hair started to sprout from the heads of the women who had been bald all their lives. The curse was finally broken because the innocent chosen one had married the prince with a pure heart. The village erupted in joy, with women dancing and touching their new hair with tears of happiness. The bald village was no longer bald, and it was renamed the Village of Beauty. Mary became a wise and kind queen who ruled beside King John for many years. She taught her people that jealousy destroys, but truth and kindness will always win in the end. And so, they all lived happily ever after, free from the curse and full of hope.